Well, hello. Welcome to the latest edition of Unregistered Live, the official live stream of Unregistered Academy. In this show, as I've said in the first 5 episodes, this show is a revelation of what we are doing at Unregistered Academy in our courses, in our research, in our scholarship, in our ongoing discussions and debate at the Academy among the students and the teachers there, as it is relevant to today's news. And today's news is full of a very important term in American history. It is conspiracy theory. In the nomination hearings for Trump's appointments, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Kash Patel, just today, I heard the term conspiracy theory used multiple times as an epithet. Conspiracy theorist is an epithet. All 3 of those nominees were called that by senators today and yesterday. And of course, this has been in public discourse for many years. Conspiracy theory was actually a term invented by the CIA. And was diffused and distributed by the CIA through the media in the 1950s and 60s and ever since. It became a way to discredit the handful of researchers and activists who were attempting to uncover the actual conspiracies that the CIA had undertaken in its career, which began in 1947. Now, you all know that in the media, in politics, in general American discourse, although I think this is about to change, and I'm hoping that this live stream and our course at Unregistered Academy will help to change this. Being called a conspiracy theorist is disqualifying in general. You will not be taken seriously by any establishment media outlet, and you'll be denounced in politics as people today are being denounced in the U.S. Senate. No one will listen to you, except for those of us in dissident politics. But it is changing. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this presentation today. And it's one of the reasons we are teaching the course on the CIA, the history of the CIA at Unregistered Academy. It is very clear, if you are at all serious about American history, and in particular modern or 20th century American history, that conspiracy theories not only have occurred, conspiracies have not only occurred in the United States, but they've been a regular feature of American politics. Of course, they, by definition, have been secret and classified, and so we have not been able to learn of the various conspiracies undertaken by the U.S. government, in particular by the CIA, until many years after the fact. And to this day, we, of course, still don't know the full extent of what the CIA has been doing in covert operations in its long history, because many things remain classified and many things will never be declassified. But what we do know now, and this is now the work of several scholars, academics at research universities. So it's not just the dissident media doing this. It is finally getting into academic research. Scholars of American foreign relations, etc., have shown in the last just few years, there have been several books that have come out just recently showing a vast extent of conspiracies undertaken by the U.S. government through the Central Intelligence Agency. Many of which are outlandish, outrageous, difficult to believe if we didn't know they were true. So I want to do just a few things today. Again, we're just giving you a little taste of what we are doing in that course and at the Academy on this issue. But it is vitally important, I think, and now a growing number of scholars think so as well, to take conspiracy theories seriously, in particular when they are related to the workings of the US government in foreign relations. So this is the course, which you can watch by streaming video at unregisteredacademy.com. The links are in the description. Click on them. You can click on this course. You can click on the course catalog, and you can click on the sign up page at the Academy to become a member, either monthly or annual, or you can buy the course a la carte. And I urge you to do that immediately. But let's begin. Let's do a short history of the CIA so that we're grounded here, we're oriented. And then I want to show you the current accounting of the number of covert regime change operations that the CIA has undertaken since 1947. It's a list that keeps growing, but very recent research has made it into a list that is frankly staggering for most people who see it for the first time. So I'm going to show that to you tonight, right now. But first, let's look at the origins of the CIA. Again, just so people are oriented around the history and the chronology. So it was created in 1947 by an act of Congress, the National Security Act of 1947. But a year later, in June of 1948, the National Security Council, with President Truman's approval, authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations, defined as, quote, all activities so planned and executed that any U.S. government responsibility for them is not evident to unauthorized persons, and that if uncovered, the U.S. government can plausibly disclaim any responsibility for them. Such operations would include propaganda, economic warfare, preventive direct action, including sabotage, anti-sabotage, demolition, and evacuation measures. This, of course, this document, NSC 10-2, was secret, was classified for many years. So when this happened, no Americans knew about it. Subversion against hostile states, including assistance to underground resistance movements, guerrillas and refugee liberation groups, and support of indigenous anti-communist elements in threatened countries of the free world. Now, that is quite a mandate for what essentially was, and still is, the private army of the President of the United States. The CIA is not accountable to Congress, and the CIA has only been made accountable to Congress one time in its history, which was between 1975 and 1977 in the Church Committee in Congress, which did, this is the only time, this is the reason we know many of the things we know today, the only time that Congress actually conducted a thorough, or a survey, an investigation of the CIA's covert activities. And we did learn much of what we know today through the Church Committee in 1975 through 77. But the CIA, other than those 2 years, has operated almost entirely in the dark, with only the knowledge of the president and certain members of his cabinet, with this broad mandate to, as you can see, essentially conduct all sorts of warfare against any hostile state or any hostile movement outside the United States. Let's begin with the list of what the CIA did in terms of covert regime change. This is just, I'm just looking at regime change operations, attempts by the CIA to overthrow governments in foreign countries. The CIA did many other things, which we cover in the course, but just this alone, covert regime change operations, we're going to look at the list of that. And by the way, this is not complete yet. We don't know, because not everything has been declassified, but the number of covert regime change operations that we are now aware of is over 80. 80. Let's begin. 1947 to 1952, but you can see here, 40s, late 40s, early 50s, the CIA was extremely active in Europe. This, of course, is after World War II, the beginning of the Cold War, the beginning of the rivalry, and then the competition with the Soviet Union for control of Europe in particular. There were communist parties, communist movements that were very powerful and popular across Western and Eastern Europe during this time. And the CIA was charged with subverting them and making sure, through any means, that the communist movements and insurgencies did not take power in any country in Europe. So the CIA funneled money, training, and even weapons into anti-communist dissidents of various kinds across Europe. They did it in France for a 5-year period, beginning in 1947. They did it in Italy for 2 decades. Italy had very large communist movements that the CIA attacked through various means, supporting anti-communist insurgencies and activists and political leaders in all of these countries. Albania, Belarus, Bulgaria, of course, attempting to kick the communists out of those Eastern European countries. In China, there's been, this is the only years we know about for sure, 49 to 68, but undoubtedly the CIA has been active in China continuously since 1949, since the takeover by the CCP of the Chinese government. Czechoslovakia, again, part of the Cold War efforts of the CIA. East Germany in the 40s, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, the Soviet Union itself, Russia itself, and Ukraine. The CIA, as you can see, was extremely active during this period in especially Eastern Europe. And there were thousands and thousands of people across that region during this period who were directly employed by the CIA to be activists or insurgents against the communists in those countries. And in many cases, successfully, by the way. And then we get into the 1950s. North Korea, of course, this follows the North Korean War, the war with Korea, which resulted in the establishment of the communist dictatorship in North Korea. So the CIA immediately after that began, or during the war actually, began sabotage and espionage operations in North Korea to bring down the North Korean communist regime. Similar in Japan, although that was less urgent because Japan, of course, by then was a U.S. ally and really subservient to the United States. But nonetheless, there were major communist movements in Japan during this time, and the CIA worked assiduously to confront them in covert operations. In Iran, very famous operation known as Operation Ajax. We cover this extensively in detail in the course. We won't talk about that right now. Guatemala, another very famous operation. Both of these deposed democratically elected leaders of those countries and replaced them with leaders who were sympathetic to and in alliance with the United States. Iran and Guatemala, those operations, as I mentioned, we cover completely in the course. So if you want to get the full story on any of these operations, take the course. Indonesia, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, we're going to look at that case in a moment. Tibet, Laos, this is now during the Vietnam War. CIA, of course, was extremely active throughout Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. And then in Cuba, perhaps the longest and maybe the most intensive CIA regime change operation going from 1959 all the way into the 2000s. It probably hasn't stopped, but we have the records, we have the documentation for those years, 1959 to 2000. This included assassination attempts of various kinds against Fidel Castro and the organizing of dissidents in Cuba, most famously the Bay of Pigs invasion attempt. 1959, Cambodia, Congo, North Vietnam as part of the Vietnam War effort. That resulted in a coup against the president of South Vietnam. Cuba, again, through the 60s, this is a different, separate operation. So there were multiple operations going on in Cuba in the 60s. The Dominican Republic, that was a coup against Trujillo, the president of the Dominican Republic. Successful coup. Guyana, Chile, another famous operation that resulted in the assassination, the coup against Salvador Allende, who was the democratically elected president of Chile, and a coup that resulted in replacing him with Pinochet, Augusto Pinochet, of course. We have Haiti. We have multiple regime change operations in Haiti during this time. South Vietnam, that's the Diem, which resulted in the Diem coup. Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, Somalia, Indonesia. Much of the Cold War was fought, or the struggle took place in Africa between the Soviet Union and the United States for the loyalty of African nations. So they were constantly in conflict and competition over control over Africa. And so the CIA was sent in as the lead force to make that happen. Late 60s, Thailand, Ghana, South Vietnam again as part of the war, Bolivia, Iraq again, Italy again, Chile, mentioned that earlier, Portugal, Angola, long operation in Angola, Argentina, El Salvador, Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Ethiopia, Poland, Cambodia, Libya, Chad, Liberia, Philippines, Panama, Haiti, Iraq. This is before the Iraq War. Zaire, otherwise known as Congo, the Congo, Yugoslavia. Oops, sorry about that. Skip this one. And then into the 2000s, Afghanistan, very famously part of the Afghanistan war for 20 years, Venezuela, Iraq, of course, Haiti, Kyrgyzstan, Syria, Palestine. Many people don't know this. Even a lot of pro-Palestine activists don't know this. When Hamas defeated and removed Fatah, their rival in Gaza, during this period, 2006-07, this is when Hamas sort of gained control of Gaza. They were actually assisted by the CIA for complicated reasons, which we cover in the course. Libya, 2011, that's the removal of, results in the removal of Gaddafi and his eventual execution. Syria, the so-called Syrian dirty war. This is when the CIA was funding Al-Qaeda-based rebels in Syria to overthrow the Assad regime, which they eventually succeeded in doing this year. Bolivia, an attempt to overthrow the Morales government. And then Venezuela, which did succeed in placing a U.S. proxy in the presidency briefly. Now, these were all conducted. What were these actual operations? They ranged from assassination attempts. There were about a half a dozen assassinations of foreign leaders by the CIA during this time. Again, these were all clandestine operations, totally in secret. Mostly, though, what the CIA did in these operations was fund and train and assist in various ways armed, militant, dissident, insurgent groups in these foreign countries. How successful were they? Roughly 40% of the time, the CIA succeeded in their regime change operations, and the government that they were targeting was, in fact, overthrown and replaced by a U.S.-friendly government. Let's look at one particular operation, which I think people will realize immediately the importance of it, which was in Iraq. This is just one of, as you can see, close to 100 operations, but this is an especially illustrative one and an important one. Again, very few people know this, even a lot of people who are very well aware of the Iraq War and know its history and understand the politics of it. But let's just talk about the the original origins of the Iraq War, which really are in the 50s, 1950s. This is when the United States began its involvement, its intervention in Iraq through the CIA, through covert operations. So General Abdel Karim Qasim of Iraq at that time, he led a nationalist revolt that overthrew the pro-Western government of Iraq at the time. He was an Arab nationalist, and because of that, he allied himself with Nasser in Egypt, who was sort of the leader of the pan-Arab nationalist movement at the time, anti-Western, anti-US, anti-British. He also allied himself with pro-Nasser Muslims in Lebanon who were fighting against the Christian and pro-Western government there. So he was a problem. He was a problem for the West. He was becoming a problem for the West. He wanted to kick out the colonial powers and the neo-colonial powers in the form of the US and make all of the Arab world sovereign to the Arab people. So, of course, the Western governments, in particular the United States, could not tolerate this for long. The Lebanese government at that time, who were facing this Muslim insurgency that was aided by Qasim, asked the United States for help against him. And Eisenhower, the president at the time, sent a force of 14,000 U.S. troops into Lebanon to forcibly remove these Muslim insurgents that had been financed by Qasim of Iraq. Qasim continued to promote Arab nationalism, and then he made his ultimate fatal mistake, the worst thing you could do during this period, during the Cold War. He began buying weapons directly from the Soviet Union. And that, as you will see if you take the course, was a guaranteed recipe for one's demise. Arab leaders across the world who aligned themselves in this way with the Soviet Union during the Cold War almost invariably were either killed or removed from power, or both. And that's exactly what happened with Mr. Qasim. So in 1959, a year later, what the CIA did in response to this guy and his Arab nationalist movement was it recruited 6 young Iraqi men to assassinate Karim Qasim. And one of these would-be assassins was this guy, and this right here. That's a 22-year-old Saddam Hussein at the time that he was recruited by the CIA to conduct this covert assassination operation. For various reasons, the assassination failed, and Hussein fled to Egypt, where he lived for many years in exile. But 2 years after that, Qasim went even further with his nationalist project. He nationalized, meaning seized, part of the Iraq Petroleum Company, which was owned by both British and American companies. So he expropriated this property, these companies that were owned by British and American concerns. And again, that's another recipe for one's own demise. Nationalizing American or British interests, holdings, is guaranteed to get the CIA and the US government to come after you. And that's precisely what happened here. So in 1963, shortly after this, the CIA organized another coup against Qasim. And this one was successful. And you can see the aftermath here. That is Qasim with multiple bullets through his body, and his various assistants and lieutenants around him also murdered in a restaurant in Baghdad. And Saddam Hussein was one of the assassins. After his assassination, his party, his ruling group, was replaced by the Ba'ath Party. And again, if you know anything about the Iraq War, and I'm sure most people watching this know all about it, you will know what that means. That was Saddam Hussein's party until he himself was assassinated during the Iraq War. Saddam Hussein, who was a member of the Ba'ath Party, he returned to Iraq and he was installed as head of the secret police. And that eventually made him even more powerful than the president and the prime minister of Iraq. The CIA then gave Saddam Hussein the names of thousands of communists and other leftists who were sympathetic to the Soviet Union anti-Arab nationalists. And Hussein then used those names to coordinate the arrests and executions of 5,000 of those people with the help and guidance of the CIA. Saddam here in this picture, this is at this time in 63, he's on the far left on top of that tank. So the CIA, it is not an exaggeration. I think this is clear now. Not an exaggeration to say that the CIA created Saddam Hussein and then we have all reaped the consequences of that ever since. And so this is just one very, very important and illustrative example of what the CIA has been doing in terms of conspiracies, secret, organized plots, unknown to the American people, unknown to Congress most of the time, that has resulted in reshaping the globe. And so I'll be happy to take some questions. We can put any questions or comments in the chat. I'd be happy to answer them or address them. But there is so much more to this story, again, that we cover in the course. The history of the CIA at unregisteredacademy.com. You can click on that in the description to look at the course, to sign up for the course, or to join the academy so that you can take this course and all of our other courses. Let's see what the questions are here. A question about Werner Herzog's 2012 documentary, The Act of Killing, about the Indonesia coup genocide. Yes, that is, I don't know. I mean, I've only watched a piece of that film, but yes, it is broadly accurate about the CIA's involvement in the mass murder of communist activists in Indonesia in the mid-1960s. That was very much a CIA covert operation. Interestingly, this is a side note, one of the participants in that operation against the communists was Barack Obama's stepfather, Lolo Sotoro. Barack Obama, as you all may know, lived in Indonesia when he was a child during this time, and his stepfather worked for a CIA-based company in Indonesia and did work in helping to identify and combat the communist insurgency in Indonesia. I don't know. No one knows if he actually called out assassinations, if he actually identified targets to be murdered, but he was certainly part of that broad operation that was led by the CIA. Another person who was essentially worked for the CIA through the Ford Foundation, which was a CIA front group in the 1960s, was Barack Obama's mother, Stanley Dunham, which is why I have said in public, and I've written about this, I've written articles about this, Barack Obama was very much a child of the Central Intelligence Agency, and one can say a child of the American Empire, which makes all these claims about him being a radical Muslim activist completely absurd. So yes, that is very much a part of the story. The Indonesian piece of this is very much a part of the story. All right, that is it for today. I hope you all enjoyed this and learned a few things. Check out unregisteredacademy.com. Click the links in the description. And I hope to see you in class. Otherwise, I will see you next week for Unreported on Wednesday and the next edition of this Unregistered Live next Thursday. Go to unregisteredacademy.com. Take a look. Come in. Join us. Thank you all. Good night. Peace.